Today we shall be covering the third chapter of Class 6 NCERT. First of all, let's get to know what all we will be covering in today's lecture. We will be starting with a basic historical overview of fibers. We will understand what are fibers, their types. We will study how are fibers produced. Finally, we will cover all the stages of fiber production in detail. Now, some of you might be thinking, ये बहुत ही basic chapter है, इससे questions नहीं आते. Please think twice. The processes हैं यहाँ पे fiber production के ginning, spinning, weaving, knitting. उनमें क्या key differences हैं? All these questions are quite relevant to UPSC and other such exams as well. Besides that, we will be covering in detail about cotton and jute as a natural fiber source. So I hope you really enjoy this session. Let's start today's class. So friends, today we are used to seeing big clothing brands, but it did not start like this. In ancient times, we clothed ourselves with the only purpose of covering our bodies. Factors like aesthetics and fashion sense were far from imagination. With the establishments of agricultural communities, people learned the art of weaving. Twigs and grasses were weaved to make mats and baskets. Fabrics were made by weaving vines, animal hair, and their fleeces. Understandably, natural fibers could have only been used in earlier times, as technology to make synthetic fibers a reality came much later, as recently as about 100 years ago. Early Indians made use of cotton growing in abundance along the Ganga River to make fabric. In Egypt, flax plant was used to make fabrics. You must notice here how availability of a certain material paves the way for people's choices. Stitching until then was an alien concept altogether. The invention of sewing needles later made stitching possible. So people at that time would simply drape themselves with fabrics they were able to make, like you still do with sari or lungi for that matter. Now this diagram here is the crux of the chapter. So basically there are raw materials, for example cotton, jute, etc. These raw materials are used to make fibers. Fibers se fir banta hai yarn, and yarns are then used to make fabric. This is what you need to understand. Now let us understand in a little more detail. What you see here are thin strands of a thread. These in real are even much thinner than a regular thread. These are called fibers. There are two kinds of fibers. One is natural and the other is synthetic. As the name suggests, natural fiber have natural sources. For example, cotton and jute come from their respective plants. Wool comes from animal fleeces and animal hair. Similarly, silk fiber is taken from silkworm's cocoon. For the major part of our history, we have used only natural fibers for clothing. Only recently, the technology had been developed to manufacture fibers using chemicals. Some of them are polyester, acrylic, and nylon. These are all basically synthetic fibers. So now let's understand the processes that are involved at various stages of fiber production. So guys, please pay attention. These are things and concepts that can definitely be asked in the exams. So this is the definition of ginning. The process used to separate out the fiber so as to get cotton fiber. And what do we separate it out from? The seeds. Now look at this picture. It shows the fruits of the cotton plant pictured in a cotton field. These fruits of the cotton plant are known as cotton bolls. Once these fruits grow into maturity, they burst open, and what you have inside of them are seeds that are covered in cotton fibers. So next step now is to separate these cotton fibers from the seeds so that they can be further used in the fabric production supply chain. This process only itself is known as ginning, the process of separation of the fiber from the seed. So I hope as far as ginning is concerned, there is no confusion. Next, what we have is spinning. Spinning is the process through which we convert fibers into yarns, and these very yarns are then converted into fabric. What we do here is take some cotton wool, then draw out some fibers and twist them together to form a thicker strand. Remember, fiber and yarn both are strands only. Fibers are thinner strands which are bound together to make a comparatively thicker strand of cotton, which is known as yarn. I hope the difference is clear. Now, spinning yarn can be done manually. There are two instruments to do that. First is what we call takli. This is how it looks like. It is used to spin fibers into yarns. And the other is the more popular one, courtesy Gandhiji, the charkha. It is also used to manually spin cotton fibers. This charkha was made popular during our independence struggle wherein it promoted the idea of self-dependence and boycotting of the British-made goods, textiles in particular. So spinning through manual tools, that is using a takli or a charkha, has its limitations. So large-scale production is done through spinning machines, and you have a picture of them right in front of you here. So until now, we have covered how fibers are first separated through ginning process, then through spinning, these separated fibers are converted into yarns. So the next process is converting these yarns into fabric. Now there are two ways of doing this, knitting and weaving. Let's look at these processes one by one. So in both the processes, you need to understand we are making fabric using yarn only. In knitting, we use a single yarn, while in weaving, we use two yarns at the same time. This is the key difference between these two methods. Knitting is done by hand as well as machines. Please note that weaving is done on looms. These looms are either hand operated or power operated. The pictures here should help you remember this. In this chapter, there were some additional facts also that were provided, and they are important from exams perspective. So let's quickly cover them. Now, cotton and jute are most significant natural fibers. Let's study them one by one. The fruit of the cotton plant, which contains the fiber, is known as cotton bolls. Once these bolls mature, they crack open themselves. What we see is cotton fibers inside these fruits, but the seeds of the fruit are also mixed with the fibers. We have already learned how ginning is used to separate them out, so no point repeating here. Let us see some other important aspects of the cotton plant. You must know that these plants are grown in places with particular feature and characteristics. First is the type of soil that is required. Cotton plants are mostly grown on black soil. The other important factor is the climate. We need a warm climate to be able to grow cotton. Cotton is basically a crop of tropical and subtropical areas and therefore requires uniform temperature varying between 21 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius. The growth of cotton is negatively impacted when the temperature falls below 20 degrees Celsius. You should also know that frost is dangerous for cotton plants' growth. For the same reason, it is grown in areas having at least 210 frost-free days in a year. In India, cotton is grown in three distinct agroecological zones, which are northern, central, and the southern zones. The states that comprise the northern zone are Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan. States that are categorized in the central zone are Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Madhya Pradesh. And finally, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka are the states that fall in the southern zone. Please note that there are other states also wherein cotton is grown apart from the ones that are mentioned above, such as Odisha or West Bengal. But on an average, the production from these states are usually found to be lower in comparison. Now let us come to the other natural fiber. Unlike cotton plant, the part that contains the fiber in case of a jute plant is the stem of the plant and not the fruit. The plant is harvested once it attains the flowering stage. The stems of these harvested plants are dipped in water for a couple of days until they start to rot. Then the fiber is separated from the rotten stems manually by hand. Now let's look at the climatic conditions which are required for jute cultivation in India. See, ideal temperature for jute cultivation is a little more than 25 degrees Celsius, which means we need a warm climate. Further, the relative humidity should range somewhere between 70% to 90%. Jute requires 160 to 200 centimeters of rainfall on a weekly basis, and also additional water is needed during the sowing period. The soil which is most suited is alluvial or loamy, which is usually found in river basins. In India, jute cultivation occurs mostly in eastern parts. West Bengal accounts for almost 50% of the total jute production in India. Other states such as Bihar, Orissa, and some parts of Uttar Pradesh, Tripura, Meghalaya comprise the other 50% of the total production output of jute in India. So friends, that is it. That is all what we had in today's session. I really hope आपको वीडियो अच्छा लगा होगा, और अगर अच्छा लगा है, अपने काम का लगा है, then please subscribe to our channel Simple Classes. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day ahead. See you soon in the next video.